Okay, hi again, everybody. Welcome to this evening's 2023 committee process overview. I'm Dr. Amanda Dye. I'm the Director of Advising and Programs at Beyond Barnard, and I'm really excited to talk to you all a little bit about what to expect in the coming academic year as you are preparing for professional school applications. So my goals today are pretty simple. First, I want to take the opportunity to give everyone a chance to think a little bit about your readiness for the application process. We'll talk a little bit about how readiness can look, in a few different ways. We'll also then talk about the purpose, timeline, and components of our committee application. So that's the biggest piece of the presentation today, really helping everybody to understand what's going to happen over the next few months. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the professional school application process and what to expect in terms of the timeline for that. And throughout the presentation, I'm going to try to highlight some resources that can be helpful to you no matter where you are in your process. So let's jump right in and talk a little bit about application readiness. I like to think of this as a question, that is about when it's time for you as an individual to apply to professional programs. The answer really differs from person to person, and when you enter college or when you finish college doesn't really determine when you're going to be able to apply to professional programs. Things that I like to ask folks to consider are really basic things to start. First, are you going to complete your undergraduate program in time to enter your health professions program? Medical and dental applicants are going to be applying in summer 2024 to start their programs in 2025. So you want to be able to complete your undergraduate program, and if you're currently in a graduate program, that program as well, in time to apply. You want to think about whether you're going to be able to complete all of the pre-health science courses that you need to complete, especially those that contain content that's covered in the relevant entrance exam by this coming spring. And you want to think about your entrance exam timing. So are you going to be able to successfully complete that exam no later than early June? And really that's very much the latest that I would put a test to. I always encourage folks to please be realistic about the timeline to prepare for their exam. MCAT takers, generally speaking, you want to budget about 6 months if you're in school or working while you're preparing. It can be shorter if you are not doing, really anything else full time at the same time, but most people do need to plan for several months of preparation. You want to also think about your readiness in terms of academics. So calculating your science GPA is really important. The exact type and number of courses that go into this GPA can differ a little bit from application service to application service. So if you're applying to MD programs versus dental programs, the calculation looks a little bit different. And you should use the course classification guidelines and the BCPM GPA guidelines for your intended application service. We're going to encourage you to classify your courses according to their primary content, not just the department that offers them. So very classic example, you may take a statistics course in, say, the psychology department, but that's still a math course because the content of that course is math, even though it's not offered in a math department. You can use any online GPA calculator. And really the only, the biggest thing to remember is that the A+ on the Barnard transcript is going to be moved to an A for application services. So all application services use a maximum GPA of 4.0. If you're still taking classes, including sciences this year, you can try to project your grades for spring, think about how many credits you're planning to take and about where you expect your grades to be to get a sense of what your total GPA is going to be at the end of this year. It's also important to evaluate the breadth and depth of your coursework and GPA trends over time. So, you may feel that, say, your first semester is not as strong as other semesters in your college career. If you're seeing a strong upward trend, that's a really important thing. If you're seeing a much more kind of up and down trend over time, that could be something that we should talk about a little bit. It could be something that raises questions with professional programs. I have here in the second bullet just some national average statistics for students who enter professional education. So for MD programs, allopathic medical programs, in 2022, fall 2022 is the last year that we have complete data for. We'll get the 2023 data this coming spring. But in 2022, the average GPA for science was 3.68 and 3.75 overall, and a 511.9 MCAT. Those are the average numbers for everyone who started an MD program in 2022. The numbers are a little bit different for DO, osteopathic medical schools, 3.53 in sciences, 3.61 overall, and a 504.8 MCAT. And for dental schools, it's really similar to DO programs. So for dental programs, DDS and DMD, 3.54 science and 3.61 overall. And the academic average DAT score is 20.8 for entering students. It's really important to remember that individual schools' metrics can vary a lot from these national averages. So individual school medians and the ranges of scores that they accept can vary. The numbers are not deterministic, right? I mean, even if you were perfectly happy, your numbers are as good as they could possibly be, that doesn't guarantee that a person is going to be successful in the application process. And by that same token, if your numbers are under the national average, there's still room for applications. And so you really do want to be paying attention to what's typical at the schools that you are applying to. And we'll talk a little bit more about the notion of kind of being a good applicant for particular schools as we go forward. But I want to encourage everybody to take advantage of some really important resources for understanding these more school-specific data sets. So for folks who are interested in applying to MD or any combined MD program, including MD PhD, you can use a guide called MSAR, Medical School Admissions Requirements. It's a subscription service, but it's not terribly expensive. It's $28 for 1 year and $36 for 2 years. And I think it's a really good investment for the application year. It will show you information including median MCATs and GPAs, as well as ranges of scores that are accepted at individual programs. But beyond that, it shares tons of information about school curricula and different opportunities that are available and outcomes for students at different schools. You can get similar information for osteopathic schools through the Choose DO Explorer. That doesn't have any cost, but you do have to register to use it. And for dental applicants, the ADIA Official Guide to Dental Schools and the Dental School Explorer are a print and online guide of a similar type. There is a subscription required for that as well. When we think about application readiness, I absolutely want you to push past just those metrics and the more logistical and timing kinds of questions, and ask yourself a little bit about your readiness for professional education. So if you've ever come to one of my pre-health overview sessions, you will have heard me talk about the AAMC's core competencies for entering medical students. I think these competencies go pretty well for dental students as well. So I encourage you to reflect on how your application demonstrates these different competencies, and that can be through your coursework as well as through extracurricular activities, research, clinical experience, jobs that you may have had. Really, there's no bounds on how you demonstrate these kinds of competencies, but you do want to make sure that they are present in your application. I encourage folks to reflect on whether they have started to develop experiences that are of the type that professional schools will be looking for. So, how strong is your clinical experience, your record of research? Do you have leadership experience, service experience? What other significant commitments are you going to demonstrate in your application? Schools are really going to get to know you largely through the experiences that you share with them. So you do want to make sure that your application is bringing, a holistic set of experiences that are really representative of you, the kind of candidate that you are going to be, as well as the kind of medical student or dental student that you hope you're going to be. When we're talking about application readiness, as I mentioned before, you want to think about your readiness and the kinds of programs that you're interested in at the same time, because beyond metrics, schools are always going to look for students whose interests align with their mission and strengths. If we're talking about a school like SUNY Downstate really cares about the community that it serves in Brooklyn. it's incredibly rare, potentially never happens, that they interview people who don't have an interest in urban health. Typically, a school like SUNY Downstate is going to look for people who already have experiences, either clinical work or service experiences that put them into communities like Brooklyn or in Brooklyn itself. And so you want to think about, what are the things that you're bringing to the table and how are they going to speak to the schools that you're applying to? Do your goals for yourself as a medical student really align with what that medical school offers? And so thinking really specifically about your fit to the individual schools that make up your list is a really key component of application review. There is a difference between a good medical school applicant overall and a good medical school applicant for a particular program. Not every school is looking for exactly the same thing. Okay, with that all said, and just to cap that off, if you have questions about your readiness, if you want to talk with me about whether you are ready to apply, those are things that we can do. You are very welcome to set up a time to chat. If you feel super confident and you're going to apply in the coming application cycle, then this next section is for you. We're going to talk a lot about what to expect from the committee process. So first of all, why? Why are we here today? Why do I maintain this process? I do it because I think it really helps applicants. So the goal of the committee process is really to support everyone who's applying to medical and dental schools and to help you prepare for the application process you're going to encounter with professional programs. The committee process is going to ask you to create and then later refine materials that you are going to use in your application in the next summer. And the process is designed to encourage you to do some self-reflection. We'll ask you to come to workshops, to engage with advising, and really to think about your candidacy, the kind of story that you want to tell as a candidate, and to refine your materials such that they are really exciting and accessible to the programs you're applying to. So yes, there's a committee letter at the end of it, and we'll talk a little bit about what goes into that letter, but that's not the point of the process for me. For me, it's really about helping folks to get ready for the professional school process. So the committee letter itself, we do write. It's a narrative introduction that kind of holistically reviews your application portfolio. We are going to talk not just about your academics, although definitely we can talk about that, including why you chose to study what you chose. But we're going to talk about your research. We'll talk about your clinical experiences, your service experiences, and any additional activities that are really important to you. So maybe you've had a really important experience with student journalism or student government. Maybe you have a job outside of Barnard that's really important to you. Those are things that we can highlight in the committee letter to kind of help provide an introduction to you, the candidate, between you and your professional schools. Committee letters are kind of a custom in medical and dental admissions. Professional schools generally do talk about valuing the perspective that that committee letters provide. And I think that committee letters are also really helpful in providing contextual information. So a really common example of that is maybe there's a grade on your transcript that you're not as happy with. Maybe it doesn't look like the others and there was a reason. Maybe something in your individual life was going on when you were taking a particular course. If you share information about that with us, then we can provide some context about what happened in that particular course that you don't really have a natural place to include as an applicant in the primary application. I think that, things like having restrictions on your time due to a need to work, for example, that could be something that we provide a little bit of context about as well. I really do strongly encourage all prospective medical and dental applicants to go through this process. Again, not because I think that the letter is magic, but because I do think that it's a really helpful process, and because professional schools know that Barnard offers a committee letter, so typically they will expect to see one if you're coming from a college that offers a committee letter. If there's anybody out there tonight or listening later who is looking to apply to other kinds of application services, other kinds of professional programs like PA, public health, veterinary medicine, these application services do not really accept committee letters of the type that Barnard creates specifically. So usually I would encourage you not to do the full application process, but rather to participate in the workshops and all of the sort of improving your application stuff along the way. If there's anybody out there to whom this applies, we can also chat offline. So this is just a little representation of what goes into creating your committee letter. So we're going to ask you to prepare a written application, and I'll talk about all the deadlines and components of that. We're going to do an interview with you in the spring semester, and you're also going to collect individual letters of recommendation. And all of those are sources of information for your committee letter, which is individualized to you and very, very specific to your portfolio. When we submit the committee letter to your professional programs, to the application services that you're going to use, we will send a cover letter that has some basic information about Barnard, a little bit about our curriculum. You know, we talk a little bit about how our chemistry courses are arranged differently than many other schools. And then we'll include your individual committee letter plus all of the individual letters of recommendation that you collect over the course of the spring. So all of those things together go into one PDF, and that's what we share with the application services, which then send it out to the schools you're applying to. This is what the overall timeline looks like. Everything here is super small, so don't worry, I'm going to go through it in a larger font next. But I just want to note, if you're a visual person and you want to have a nice representation of this that you can like put on a bulletin board, you can find this timeline under pre-health advising resources in Handshake. So there's a printable version that you can have there. This is kind of the overall gist of things. In the fall and winter, so beginning next month and going through January, you're going to have the time to complete the committee application, the written part. So we'll ask you for some biographic information. We'll ask you to respond to a few essay questions and provide a list of your experiences. We will ask you to do all of this before you can schedule an interview, and everybody is going to get access to this application on November 15th. After you've completed your interview, after you've collected your individual letters of recommendation, you'll be able to actually request your committee letter. That's the point at which we will finalize everything and upload it to the application service. And you can do that after you have submitted a primary application. You don't need to worry about that too much now. We will talk about that in much more detail in the spring. I want to note before we talk about the timeline that there are some different dates for first-time applicants versus re-applicants. And I just want to clarify that by first-time applicant, we mean anybody who has not had a committee letter written and submitted on their behalf in the past. So if you have participated in part of the committee process before, maybe you even had a committee interview in the past, but you ended up deciding to wait to apply to professional schools and you never requested your letter, you are still considered a first-time applicant. You are only a reapplicant if you know that Barnard has submitted a committee letter for you to professional programs in any past cycle. So with that in mind, this is what the timeline looks like. As I mentioned, the application is going to open on November 15th. The application is housed in Slate, which you probably have used if you've applied for admission or financial aid at Barnard in the past few years. You may already have an account in Slate if you've done so. If you're an alum who's been out for a few years, you may need to create an account, but it's super easy. And the application is going to be due on January 31st, which I believe is a Wednesday, at 11:59 p.m. That's the due date for all first-time applicants. I want to highlight that if you are planning to take a January MCAT or a DAT in January, you should really be planning carefully around this deadline. It's important to be able to submit by the deadline. If you're a reapplicant, you do have a little bit longer to submit your application, and it's a shorter application since we've collected a lot of information already in the past. The deadline for reapplicants to submit the written part of the application is March 6th. We will have interview scheduling for first-time applicants in February. So that's when you're going to have access to the schedule. You'll be able to pick a time that works for you, and you'll meet with one of our committee members who are faculty members from departments, including the natural sciences, but also departments across campus. And we'll do interview scheduling for reapplicants the next month in March after the submission deadline for them. If you're a first-time applicant, you're going to be conducting your interview sometime in March or April. Again, you're going to have the ability to schedule. It's first come, first serve. So schedule early if you're interested in particular dates. And in April, we'll do interviews for reapplicants. For everybody, the first day that you can access the letter submission request is going to be May 1st. You can actually hit submit on that piece of the application once you have submitted a primary application. We'll expect all letters of recommendation to be due to us by May 15th, 2024, so that we can have them in time to incorporate them with your committee letter once you request it. And the last day to request a committee letter for the 2024-25 application cycle is August 1st. This is what the application start page looks like. I want to caution you, please be very careful to access the application through the link that you're going to receive from me. It is very important that you not try to access the application by just logging into Slate and finding the committee application. You need to come from this start page in order for the application to render properly. If you hear from other folks who maybe aren't on my list of potential applicants and they want you to share the link with them, please encourage them to reach out to me. It's really important that everybody be receiving messages directly from me so that they can use the correct links to access this application. As I said before, if you are a new user of Slate, then you'll need to be able to log in using your existing credentials for that system. If you haven't used a Slate for an application in the past, you just need to set a new password before you leave that start page. And this is the stuff that the committee letter is going to ask you for. So up front, we'll ask for a little bit of demographic information. We'll ask you to read and acknowledge the statement of understanding that's linked on that first page. Basically, that just goes over all of the dates and deadlines that we just reviewed in the past few slides. We'll ask you to complete the FERPA waiver, so that will tell us whether you do or do not waive access to your committee letter and recommendations. We'll ask you to upload transcripts, including a Barnard transcript, and if you're a transfer student or you've taken summer classes anywhere, transcripts from those institutions. Unofficial transcripts are 100% okay. You do not need official transcripts for this. We'll also ask you to upload a copy of your resume or CV and to disclose any institutional actions on your record. So that could include things like residence hall infractions or any academic actions that maybe have been taken. We'll ask you to complete a series of applicant essays. These have pretty specific questions to guide you. And I want to note specifically that you'll see that each of the essays is set to 5,000 characters. That's a maximum. That's not required. You may have more to say for some questions than for others, and that's okay. Use as much space as you need to thoroughly answer the question. Do not feel like you have to write that much for every single one. We'll ask you to share some information about your pre-professional preparation. So the list of activities that you want to share with your professional schools, you'll share with us as well. We'll ask you to provide either a draft or an outline of your personal statement or some series of ideas about it. Basically, we want everyone to be thinking about the direction they might want to go. And the committee application will also ask you to provide a list of folks who are going to be letter writers for you. Please note that you are going to be able to add folks to this list after the application submission deadline. So you don't need to have that list finalized by January 31st. If you finalize it later, you can continue to add people after that deadline, no problem at all. The committee interview is going to be something that happens in March or April, depending on when you schedule, and it's a traditional style interview. The goal of the interview is just to help us learn a little bit more about you and allow you maybe to expand on the written materials you've created. We'll also be looking to see your ability to effectively communicate about your goals and your motivations. And really, that's the point of professional school interviews. Assessing communication skills is a very, very important part of all professional school interviews. And so really we want to offer some practice for that. You'll be able to sign up, as I said before, after you have submitted your written application. Interviews are conducted with members of the Health Professions Advisory Committee. That's a faculty committee. It's chaired by me, and the members come from all of the science departments, as well as a mix of other folks. Your letters of recommendation are going to be an important part of the committee process as well. A good letter of recommendation should be a candid and thorough evaluation of you from someone who knows you well. Writers should be people who have observed relevant work of yours and be able to attest to your strengths and abilities. And ideally, these letters should assess your fit for the health professions program you're seeking to enter, if that's possible. We encourage folks who are applying through the committee application to collect between 3 and 5 individual letters. I always think it's important to have a core of academic letters. So I would encourage you to have at least one from a pre-health science professor and at least one letter from someone who knows you within your major. The other letters that you collect could be from a mix of sources, including, things that have been important to you. Maybe if you've had a long research experience, a letter from your PI. If you've been really involved in a long-term service experience, a letter from a supervisor there, et cetera, et cetera. So the things that are most important to you ideally can be represented with letters. There's not always a one-to-one relationship there. Maybe, if you're involved in a student organization, for example, you might not be able to have a letter from that source, but there's no expectation that all of your activities have a letter associated with them. That's just, I think, a way that I like to encourage people to think about possible letters. It's important to choose your list of writers holistically. So you don't want 3, 4, 5 letters that all kind of say the same thing. You ideally want people who have different perspectives, who can provide their points of view in a way that really holistically describes your candidacy. It's very important to note that once we receive letters, they are not removable. So choose and request your letters carefully, because we can't remove letters from the portfolio once they are with us. This is also true for reapplicants. So your letters can certainly be updated, but we don't remove previous letters. When you are requesting your letters of recommendation, which you're going to be able to do through the platform, the application platform, you'll be asked to complete a FERPA waiver for each of the writers, and you can request them and track them through the committee application. The status of your letters will be updated within a business day or 2 after we receive the letter. So we do those updates manually so that we can check letters to make sure that they have things like appropriate letterhead and a signature, that your name is spelled correctly, those sorts of things. We do a kind of quality check for, and then we mark them as received. And as I said before, an unabridged copy of every recommendation letter that we have on file is going to be submitted with your committee letter. These letters are due by May 15th. Here is just a little bit of information about the letter submission request. The main thing to remember here is that you'll be able to do this after you submit your primary application. I will do a session kind of like this one for the actual application process at the end of April, and we will talk a lot more about the letter request process then. Okay. So if you are looking to get started on pieces of the committee application, things that you can do right now as you wait the next 3-ish weeks for the application to open are, first of all, calculate your GPAs, collect your transcripts from all institutions. Remember that if you have coursework from colleges outside of Barnard, those courses are going to get factored into your GPAs as well. You can start drafting your list of activities, work and activities. You should know that you'll have up to 700 characters to describe those experiences, so you can get started on drafts of those descriptions. You can review your resume or CV with a peer career advisor at Beyond Barnard. You can usually get an appointment the next day with PCAs, so really any time between now and the application due date. Of course, keep in mind that PCAs will work through the end of classes, so beginning of December. It's, I think, reasonable to start thinking about your prospective list of evaluators, although you should not feel any pressure to be making requests right away. And especially if you have already graduated from Barnard, please hear me when I say we need to make sure that your contact information is updated in Handshake. So if your Handshake account is still associated with your @barnard.edu address, please reach out to me, to pre-health advising @barnard.edu, and we will start the process of updating your Handshake account to a permanent email address. And this will ensure that you're going to continue to get communications about the process throughout the entire year. Okay. really quickly, I'm going to run through some things to know about professional school application process, just so that you all know a little bit about what to expect in the coming summer. First of all, everyone should be preparing to take an entrance exam. If you are applying to medical school, either allopathic or osteopathic, you will need to take the MCAT. And if you are applying to dental schools, you'll need to take the DAT. If there are folks out there applying to other kinds of programs, you may need a different exam. Entrance exams are intended really to help schools understand your knowledge of particular science concepts, to analyze your problem solving and critical reading and analytical skills. Historically, these exams have been predictors of success in professional school and on licensure exams. And so, although many other graduate schools and professional schools have moved away from standardized testing, in medical and dental school in particular, there is no move to lessen the reliance on these entrance exams. So it is really important to prepare as adequately as you can for them. That starts with learning about what's on the exam. You can do that through the links here to then research preparation tools, including practice questions and exams that are available through the AAMC, the organization that writes and owns the MCAT, to third-party resources, things like UWorld that have question banks that you can subscribe to have access to. If you have applied to or are applying to the AAMC's fee assistance program, keep in mind that you will get a suite of MCAT preparation materials if you're approved for that program. I'll talk a little bit more about fee assistance later. When you're creating your study plan, please consider all of your other obligations, when your midterms are, if you're currently a student, busy times at work, if you're an alum, and make sure that you're trying to practice consistently and effectively. It's really important to learn the structure of the exam. It's very important to complete full-length practice exams under conditions as similar to the application as to the exam as possible. You want to be doing that in preparation for your actual test date. As I said before, I do recommend taking your exam prior to submitting your application and no later than early June. Although keep in mind that none of the application services require that you have an MCAT score or a DAT score in order to actually submit your application. So you could theoretically take your exam and submit your application right after or even before your exam date, and then your test score just gets automatically uploaded into your application once the test score is available. Please think carefully about, your school exams, if you have them, other commitments, things like holidays, of course, you want to consider as you're planning for scheduling. And do keep in mind that if you are planning to apply in the coming summer, early June is the latest that I would push it. An earlier exam is probably desirable. Primary applications, so the first part of the application process, they're going to open in May. So you should anticipate finalizing your application materials, like your personal statement, your list of activities. All of that sort of stuff should be ready to go within the month of May, typically. And you should request an official transcript to be sent to your application service. If you're currently a student, please wait until spring 2024 grades are posted to do that. It's a good idea to submit your application early in the cycle. What I mean by that is it's a good idea to submit your application within the month of June, if at all possible. That doesn't mean you have to do it on the very first day, but I think within the first month of the application opening is the best time for most people to apply. Note that some professional programs, medical and dental, require situational judgment tests. So CASPER is the older and more common. There's also the AAMC preview, which was previously called the situational judgment test, and I just didn't update this slide. Schools may ask you to register for these tests as a supplement to your primary application. Most typically, folks are completing these after they've submitted the primary. Secondary applications will come after schools receive your primary application. Usually these are sent to all applicants, and you're going to be writing essays or short answers. You'll pay an additional fee to these programs, although if you're approved for a fee assistance program, most schools will waive their fees. Secondary applications are really best understood as an opportunity to express your interest in and your fit to a particular school. So as we talked about earlier in this presentation, Being able to communicate your fit to a particular program is an important part of the process, and the secondary is really your best chance to do that. It's important to complete secondaries quickly and turn them around within a couple of weeks, whenever possible. Okay, I want to talk really quickly about resources and then open it up for questions. So when it comes to learning more about these processes or about these training programs, the professional organizations, AAMC is for MD programs, AACOM is for DO programs, and ADIA for dental programs. They provide tons of information and resources on their website. Lots of it is free. You should learn about the centralized application services that you're going to need. So AMCAS for MD, ACOMAS for DO, and ADSAS for dental programs. And apply for fee assistance if you're eligible. For the AAMC's fee assistance program, which is the first one linked in this third bullet, it's really strictly just based on income and family size. You can take a look at the fee assistance program website, and they provide guidelines for kind of income level based on number of family members to kind of give you a sense of who's eligible. If you think you might be eligible for this program, I do encourage you to apply. The benefits are really, really great and wide-ranging. As I mentioned, they include MCAT prep, reduced registration fees. You get to apply to up to 20 schools for free. And as I said just before, most schools will waive secondary fees. So it's a really important resource. For dental applicants and for DO applicants, there are somewhat less wide-ranging fee waiver programs, and they are programs that you'll need to wait until the new year to apply for. So they accept applications after the start of the calendar year. We talked a little bit earlier about MSAR, the Choose DO Explorer, the ADIA Guide. Learning more about the specific schools that you think you might apply to is a really, really important piece of the puzzle. I also encourage you to keep an eye on the pre-health blog, where I'll post about things like professional school info sessions or kind of like fairs and things of that nature. I also have, in addition to the visual of the committee application timeline, lists of particular important dates for the committee process and other items about the committee process in pre-health advising resources in Handshake. In the spring, as I said before, we'll have a session to talk in much more detail about the primary and secondary application process. Early in the fall, I do an interviewing workshop. So you're going to continue to have support for learning about the application process through the next year. I'll provide workshops on writing and revising personal statements and writing about your experiences. We'll do a workshop on how to choose your list of schools. I'll work with the Writing Fellows program to provide some additional writing support later in the spring semester. And throughout the year, you can access resume review via Beyond Barnard, especially with the PCAs who schedule appointments Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that's it for the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can come back to you all. I saw there were a couple of things that popped into the chat. So let me just open up the chat here and see what the questions are. I'm going to go through the questions that are here, and then if you have more, of course, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise the hand, et cetera, et cetera. So I have two quick questions. First is, when would I recommend that you all actually reach out to professors and others for letters of recommendation? You can really do that at any time. You're going to be able to formally submit the request as soon as you get into the committee application on November 15th. I would say that you want to make sure that you've made all of your requests by around spring break time, so early March, so that you're giving people at least a couple of months before the deadline. But anytime between now and then will work. There's also a question about, I've seen on med school websites that some require a certain amount of letters from academic versus other sources. Do we still need to fit to those standards if we use a committee process? This is a really good and important question. So most professional schools use kind of an either or model. Either you're applying with a committee letter, which is probably going to come with some number of individual letters attached to it, or you're going to apply with a list of individual letters that conform to their specific standards. So typically folks who are going through a committee process just need the committee letter and its associated letters. And that list of letters doesn't necessarily have to meet every single specification on the individual letter side. It's a nice benefit of the process. There's a question about, does everyone who goes through the committee process receive a committee letter? Yes, if you meet the deadlines. Please hear me when I say it's really important to meet the deadlines. But this process is intended to be supportive of applicants. We do not place restrictions on things like GPA, or we don't use MCAT scores or DAT scores at all in writing these letters. So the goal is that we're here to support applicants the best that we can. Okay, I think I've come to the end of the list of questions that have come to me in the chat. Anybody else have questions? Okay, I've got another one. If a person plans to apply this year, but changes their mind and applies the following year instead, can the letters of recommendation be reused, or do they need to be renewed? Really good question. So if you go through the committee process and you collect some number of letters of recommendation, but let's say May comes around and you get a really good job offer and it's for 2 years and you need to take an additional year before you apply, that's totally fine. We will keep the letters of recommendation that we have. They will stay in your file. They can be updated. So if one writer is somebody you stay in contact with and they want to send a new letter to replace the old one in the next cycle, they can do that. The other thing to know is that you would need to reapply through the committee process. So you need to submit essays and things like that again. See, a couple other questions have come in. Question about when the committee letter gets submitted to schools once you've submitted your primary. Your committee letter will be submitted to your schools within 4 to 6 weeks. Nobody waited more than 3.5 weeks this year, but 4 to 6 weeks is the timeline that we quote for submitting letters. That usually aligns with the time that it takes your application service to verify your application. So in most cases, application services are going to take at least about 4 weeks to send your application to schools. And most professional schools are not going to need your individual letters until you've already submitted your primary and secondary applications. Question about if a candidate plans on applying to both MD and DO schools, is the process the same? Yes, exactly the same. So the committee application isn't different, the letter request process isn't different, and we can share the committee letter with both the MD and the DO application service. It's not uncommon for people to apply to both. Question about when you ask for letters of recommendation, will letter writers submit it to you, or will you tell them to submit to Beyond Barnard? This is a really good question. Letters should not come to you directly. They should come to us directly. In the committee application itself, there is a page where you can add your list of letter writers. It'll ask you for the person's email contact information. And once you add an entry for a person, they'll get an email from us at Beyond Barnard, an automated email that tells them instructions on how to submit their letter. So all you have to do is get the person to agree, add their information to the portal, and then they'll get an email within 24 hours asking them with the instructions on how to submit. Lots of good questions. Oh my goodness. Okay, question about calculating GPA. When you're calculating on a 4.0 scale, are A+ and A both calculated as 4.0? Yes. Also, is submitting the committee application before the January 1st deadline advantageous? So you don't get any special preferential treatment if you submit the application early, but I would recommend trying to submit it before the deadline if you can, just for the sake of not waiting until the very, very end. But we will not do interview scheduling until after that January 31st deadline. So as long as you make it by then, you're great. If you get it done early, then you just get some little rest time. Just everybody needs. Question about whether applicants are able to see the letters of recommendation written by professors. So if you have waived your access to your letter, then that means you shouldn't be seeing the letter of recommendation. If you don't waive access to your letter, then presumably you could, ask the letter writer to share it with you. We will not share letters of recommendation with applicants, and generally speaking, professional programs tend to prefer that applicants have waived access to those letters. And then there's a question on what are restrictions on who can and can't write letters of recommendation? Really, there are not a ton. So as I said, I do recommend at least a couple of letters from faculty sources. They could be Barnard, Columbia, or faculty from other institutions. That part doesn't really matter as much. Ideally, letters will come from somebody who knows you in a supervisory context. It's best if letters don't come from contemporaries, they don't come from peers. So I wouldn't recommend letters coming from other students, for example, but faculty or a health professional whom you worked with in a clinical context, a PI from a research experience. And again, institution doesn't matter. So like if you've done research at NYU and you have a letter from a professor there, that's great. We can certainly accept those. So they don't have to just come from Barnard or Columbia. There's a question about how different are the pool of applicants for international slash in-state slash out-of-state students. I think that's probably referring to the application process, and that's probably going to differ a lot from school to school. So for some schools accept international candidates and some do not. Some private schools, some public schools accept international candidates. It's not a clean distinction between private and public there. Some public schools are relatively open to out-of-state candidates and some public schools are not. So that's really information that would be best sought through a resource like the MSAR, for example, where you can see the number of in-state, out-of-state, and international candidates that each school got an application from, how many they interviewed, how many people actually matriculated. So regarding A+ versus A, I thought that Barnard counts A+ as 4.3 on our transcript. That's correct that Barnard does. Application services do not use a 4.3 scale. So that means you have to translate from the 4.3 to a 4.0 scale. A+ and A's are worth the same to all application services. Is there a benefit to waiving access to your letter? Yes. I mean, basically the benefit is that schools will imagine that the letter is probably more frank, maybe more accurate. They may assume that a letter to which you've had access is doesn't necessarily represent the entire truth, for example. If you finalize your personal statement after the committee application deadline, are you able to update that for the committee to review? So certainly you can share a personal statement with us. We will also ask for you to share with us your complete submitted primary application. So we will get the final version of your personal statement and all of your activities when you share the application with us. If you've taken courses at Barnard/Columbia after graduating, do you calculate these grades as part of your GPA? Yes, if you've taken undergraduate level courses anywhere after graduating from Barnard, then those are considered post-bac courses, and they are factored into your undergraduate GPA, just like you'd taken a 5th year of college, basically. If you are in a graduate program, those grades are calculated separately. Is there any resource that consolidates data about upcoming med school fairs and good ways to get to know their curricula? I know the AAMC med school fair just passed, but I wasn't able to attend most of it. The AAMC does sponsor medical school fairs a couple of times a year, so that's the best source. I would say the professional school organizations, the AAMC and ACOM and ADEA, those are the best way to get information about upcoming schools. In terms of learning about schools and their curricula, individual school websites are definitely a really good place to do that. Lots of schools share a lot of information about the structure of their curricula, the different components of it on their public websites. So I think you can definitely start to take a look there. Do medical schools take letters of recommendation from international supervisors/experiences? Yes, the letter should be written in English for it to have, the maximum ability of folks to read it. Again, a letter shouldn't be translated by by a student. If you have an international supervisor who's not able to write in English, then I would suggest they work with like a private translation service to get the letter translated to English. I have seen, not at Barnard, but in a previous institution, I saw a letter that was written in Spanish and then Google translated, and it doesn't work super well. As a person who reads Spanish and English, it was, I had to read the Spanish version, and you can't necessarily imagine that everybody's going to be able to do that. A question about whether sociology and psychology count as the science GPA because they're on the MCAT. No, the MCAT includes content about sociology and psychology, but those are not considered science courses for the GPA. So for AMCAS, for MD schools, any biology, chemistry, physics, or math coursework is factored into the GPA. There's a question, how important is it that we have a pre-health science professor letter of recommendation? Very important. It's really something that, that I would prioritize because all schools are going to be interested in the assessment of science faculty who have maybe taught lots of pre-health students. It's definitely something to pay attention to. How many medical schools do I typically recommend an applicant apply to? So we will come to that, most of this kind of stuff, the stuff about the application process, a little bit later in the cycle. Typically 15 to 20 schools is about the right place for most applicants. Physics coursework is counted in the science GPA. Computer science courses are not counted in the science GPA, and neuroscience courses, if the content is biology based, yes, they can be counted as biology courses. If it's a course that counts for your neuroscience major, but the content of the course is like cognitive science or psychology, then I would say it doesn't count. So it's, yes, physics does count as a pre-health science. It counts as a science course for all science GPAs. So keep in mind when you're classifying courses, you can use the services, like the application services all have guides. So you can Google them, and I think maybe they're linked previously in the presentation. But you can use the guides for the application services you're planning to apply to help you understand exactly what counts, because as I said before, it varies a little bit from service to service. Biology, chemistry, and physics are always counted. And typically you are classifying courses according to their content, not just the department in which they're offered. Is it okay to have a letter from, is it okay to have a letter from an inorganic chemistry professor? Yeah, absolutely. Totally fine. Any course that you've taken to fulfill a pre-health science requirement is reasonable for a letter. I will indeed share the presentation plus the recording of this session with everybody later in the week. I'll send it out in an email. If you're a double major, is it important to get a recommendation from a professor in both disciplines? I think so. Yeah, I think it's really good to have both of your majors represented. If you are a double major, you know, you want schools to see the perspective of faculty who know you from your major academic commitments, and you know, letters from faculty who know you in a major, even if that major isn't a STEM major, that's still a valuable piece of your application, right? Because that's a big part of your academic history. Really, with the letters of recommendation, the goal is that you're sort of collecting letters that will help to describe important pieces of your application. Since you're applying for school, your academic letters are always going to be a piece of that, right? Because, you know, we want to know, or schools want to know a little bit more about who you are as a student. So representing things that are really important to you academically is a great thing to do with letters of recommendation. There's a question about, can your advisor who taught you or didn't teach you be your letter writer? If you are getting a letter from an advisor who hasn't taught you in a class, I would still say you'd want letters from people who have taught you. So, you know, a letter from an advisor might be an additional letter, but I would still say at least one letter from a science faculty member and at least one letter from someone in your major. Okay. Have I exhausted you all with questions? Okay, so as I said, I'm going to send out the recording of tonight's presentation and the answers to all of these questions. And I will also share the PDF of my slides, so you'll have the links to all of the things. I encourage you all to take a look, to start thinking about prepping for the committee process. You will continue to get messages from me about the application itself. If you haven't been receiving the messages about this process and you kind of got here through some other route, please do reach out to me, and I can add you to the email list so you'll consistently get communications. I'll be sending them more frequently once the committee application actually opens up and we get started in earnest. So thank you all so much for coming, for engaging, for asking questions. I assure you all, the goal here is that we help keep everybody moving along toward this application process at about the same time and with about the same resources. So we're here to help out. I look forward to working with you all this year, and I hope everybody has a really great night. See you all later.